1983, Metallica, Kill 'Em All. Let's get it.
Thrash metal.
Trash. Obviously, you can't talk about the history of heavy metal without also focusing on the very specific genre of thrash metal and the influence that it has had, because it has been incalculable, really. The two are forever intertwined like a pair of conjoined newborn twins. It's like jazz and blues. It's like pop punk and virginity. Obviously, Kill 'Em All was not the first thrash metal album, and Metallica was not the first thrash metal band. Just off the top of my head, there were a lot of guys over in Europe like Motorhead and Venom, and a lot of different bands like that were experimenting with different sounds and different ways of playing that would go on to be later categorized as thrash metal. The term thrash metal had not been coined yet in 1983 when Metallica's Kill 'Em All came out, and it certainly hadn't been coined back in the 70s when a lot of other bands were using elements that would go on to later be categorized as thrash metal. And there were also a lot of Latin American thrash metal bands as well. While I am starting this series off with Metallica's debut album, I do plan on going through and examining each one of their 10 studio albums that they've released. Over the past 40 years that Metallica has been a band, they've released a ton of demos, they've released a ton of EPs,
singles, full studio albums, the whole gauntlet.
I'm going to just focus on the studio albums because I think that's going to paint the best picture as far as their trajectory, where they came from, what they developed into, and where they're at now. And that's kind of the plan that I'm going to have for all of the bands that I cover on this channel. I'm going to take a look at their studio albums and kind of chart how they've developed and changed. Personnel for this album included James on vocals and rhythm guitar, Kirk on lead guitar, Cliff, the greatest bass player of all time, on bass guitar, and Lars, the greatest drummer of all time, on drums. This is what I would refer to as their OG lineup. It wasn't the first lineup that they had, but it was the lineup that was first associated with their initial success. And I think for me and a lot of older fans, this is the lineup that they just associate the best years of Metallica with, even though it happened about 15 years before I was born. So let's get to the songs. Track number 1, Hit the Lights. This song is very disjointed. There's a lot of start and stop solos, a lot of aggressive tempo changes. Honestly, just a lot of elements that categorize thrash metal music. Very aggressive sound, a lot of chaos. Honestly, it sounds like something right out of an 80s thrash metal catalog, if that ever was a thing. I don't know. I have no way of knowing. This was that prototypical thrash metal sound, and I think it was a really great way to introduce this band to the world and this style of music to more American markets. Track number 2, The Four Horsemen. This song has a great narrative. It's got a lot of story-driven lyrics, which I appreciate a lot. Lyrics, they revolve around a lot of imagery and symbolism in relation to the biblical chapter of Revelation. And if you know a lot about James's upbringing, his background, his Christian Science family that he was raised in, it makes a lot of sense that he would have some kind of biblical knowledge and maybe apply that to songs they were writing at that time. Track number 3, Motor Breath. Honestly, I like the way that James says motor breath in the chorus.
Track number 4, Jump in the Fire.
Maybe my favorite song from this album, definitely the most memorable to me. It isn't the fastest by far, which isn't saying a lot because this album is just fast. But as far as my interpretation of the lyrics, it sounds like a mosh pit taking place in hell. And to be honest with you, that's the perfect euphemism for 80s thrash metal.
So I think it's very appropriate.
Track number 5, Anastasia, Pulling Teeth. We all know Cliff Burton is one of the greatest and most influential bass players of all time. If you ask me, he's the best. I kind of put him in that Jimi Hendrix category where, yeah, the talent was there. Yeah, the mastery of the instrument was there. But what really kind of throws him over the top into that legendary status is how innovative he was for the music scene in general, but specifically heavier genres. Because at that time, you just didn't see the kind of complex arrangements and music theory that he would later bring onto the scene. You didn't see that with other bands at that time, especially not in heavy music. So to me, he's number 1 because of his contributions in that regard. Track number 6, Whiplash. This song just has that caveman feel. It's fast and aggressive. A lot of brain damage probably resulted from people listening to this song simply from the amount of headbanging that it caused. And for me personally, I put it on a high pedestal because it breaks the fourth wall. There's a line in there where James says, "We're Metallica." What more can you ask for?
Track number 7, Phantom Lord.
So this song, Phantom Lord, the title of it is the same name as an old band that James used to play in before Metallica. I don't hate this song, but it's not my favorite on the album. In my opinion, it's a little clunky and it's not as tight instrumentally or lyrically. I will say though, there is one specific point in the song where there is an extreme tempo shift and it gets very melodic, and it reminds me a lot of their later stuff, songs like One, and I really like how they were able to seamlessly incorporate that into a very fast-paced thrash metal song, so I really appreciated that. Track number 8, No Remorse. So this is the theme for the very popular video game Doom. This song, it actually leads with a guitar solo. That stood out to me. There's a ton of solos across this album, but the fact that they led with one in this song, really enjoyed that. And this song, it almost has like a groove metal type of vibe to it, which I really love. Across all metal genres, I would have to put groove metal up there in my top 3. There's a lot of bands that have that style that I really, really love, like Lamb of God and Rob Zombie, his work with White Zombie. I really, really appreciate that style of music. But lyrically, the song's about war. This was not that long after the Vietnam War, and obviously a time when the US was involved in a lot of conflicts across the world, so it makes sense that they would choose to write some lyrics in regards to that. I wouldn't put Metallica in the category of a very political band, but this is one of those instances where they actually do have lyrical themes that relate to that. Song number 9, Seek and Destroy. They play this song a lot live, and honestly I can see why. It's a lot of fun to sing. It has good melodies, good riffs. Overall, it's just catchy. Track number 10, Metal Militia. Honestly, not a lot to say at this point. This song, it's the closing song on the album, and it just follows the theme of the other songs that we've heard, and it kind of puts a nice little bow on top of what we've heard before. It's fast, it has James's signature vocal style, and it features a blistering solo, and that's really all it needs to do. It ties everything together very nicely. I like the track overall. In my opinion, it's not as good as some songs like Jump in the Fire or No Remorse, but it's still a very solid song, and I'm glad they decided to include it. So there you have it, the 10 tracks that Metallica chose to debut their signature sound. If I had to boil this album down to just some key buzzwords or key consistencies that you see throughout, it would probably be in relation to blistering solos, because every song seemed to have that, fast tempos and quick tempo changes, violent lyrics. In my opinion, this point is kind of meh. These lyrics are pretty tame if you ask me, especially in comparison to some of the other subgenres of metal that you could dive into. If you honestly want to compare this to like brutal slamming death metal or black metal, 2 genres I also like quite a bit.
This isn't violent at all.
But I think when you're approaching more of a mainstream audience like Metallica was doing, or beginning to do at this point, in that case, okay, fair. It's pretty violent compared to what you might hear on the radio. And lastly, just arrangements that were very, very complex compared to what was being done at the time, specifically in heavier music. And I say heavier as a blanket term, hardcore punk, heavy metal, and just every subgenre around that. Specifically speaking for the bass, the things that we saw Cliff Burton do, you just never had seen anybody do before that, not within this genre. This is probably one of the most influential albums of all time, especially in terms of heavier music, specifically metal, hardcore punk. A lot of artists took a lot of things from this album and incorporated it into their music, mainly because of how successful it ended up being. It wasn't successful outright, but it did get to that point. And the 80s, a lot of that music was shaped by some of the early stuff that Metallica was doing. This album really encapsulated what thrash metal would go on to become. As we know, it didn't encapsulate what Metallica would go on to become, but that's beside the point. Obviously, they have not stayed as tried and true and consistent to this sound as some fans would have liked for them to have been. I don't think Metallica is a band you can really put in a box like that. There's some metal bands that have been around for a long time that you can really categorize, and albums they put out are gonna be appropriate for how they've been defined in the past. I think a prime example of that is a band like Cannibal Corpse. Those guys have been around for what, 30 years? And they have
been very, very consistent. I mean that in a complimentary way, really.
I'm a huge fan of their work, and I love that they can be so consistent and true to the genre that they play while still putting out new music that, in my opinion, feels fresh and new. But in regards to Metallica, personally, I appreciate the different iterations of their sound, but this album specifically was pure thrash metal, pure speed metal, and I personally think this was the best version of them. But hey, what do I know? But you, on the other hand, I need you to let me know what you think of this album down in the comments. And as for me, I will be back very soon, thanks to the power of editing, to review Metallica's second studio album, Ride the Lightning. Honestly, there's a good chance I might be back sooner than you think, so maybe you should subscribe? No?
Okay.
But on a serious note, I post multiple videos a week. Sometimes I'll even post an entire band's discography in a day if I feel like doing it. So if you want to be a part of that and you like metal, punk, grunge, are there other genres? Bubblegum pop, cowboy gangster rap, then I think you'll be doing yourself a service by subscribing, and I'll see you next time.
Later.
So, I might have actually forgotten to give an official rating for that last album, but my plan is to just edit that part out and you guys will never know. Thanks to the power of editing, you guys will have no idea that I had to do this. This album, it gets a really high. Also, one more thing I forgot to mention. Check the description box. You'll see a link to all my socials, my Twitter, my Instagram, my OnlyFans. All the important information you need right down there. But yeah, this is a phenomenal album, one of the most influential albums of all time. A lot of heavy metal outlets will say this is one of the greatest albums of all time. If this is an album that you personally don't like, I'm gonna go to your house.
I'm gonna beat down your door. I'm gonna talk to you face to face, man to man. I'm gonna look you in the eye. I'm gonna say,
That's fine.
Art is subjective. We're all entitled to our opinions and we all have different tastes. So I would never judge a person for not being into the same thing that I'm into. I don't know how anyone could like Weezer. I'm a nice guy. I like to think that I'm a nice guy. I'm very accommodating.
You're sitting on the couch, you're watching TV, and your life is passing you by. You keep procrastinating over and over. Well, maybe I'll
Subscribe to Dark Skin Donnie's YouTube channel.
next year, maybe next semester. No, do it right now. All you gotta do is pick up the phone and
Smash subscribe like your life depends on it.
why are you making it complicated? It's easy.